It's great to see you all here today. So hello everyone. In the spirit of reconciliation, WIL Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout our nation and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. All of us have a shared responsibility to work toward justice and equity. And if you'd like to share where you are, if you're in Australia on an Aboriginal land, please do so in the chat. As chair of WIL Australia's Research and Impact Committee and as an employee at Queensland University of Technology and Edith Cowan University in Perth, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of WIL Australia to this year's Graduate Outcomes Survey webinar. Today, I'll share some of the findings from the 2024 Graduate Outcomes Survey. At the end of the presentation, I'll share the link to the report. This session is open to all WIL Australia members, and we know we have a mix of very long-term members and newer colleagues joining us here today. So I'll try to provide a bit of context as we go and keep an eye on the chat. So if people have questions, they can ask in the chat. I'll have that somewhere for me to see. Let's move that over. So here's what we're going to be covering today. I'll start with a quick overview of the WIL Australia items included in the Graduate Outcome Survey, what we asked and why. And then we'll look at participation trends in 2024 and since 2026 for some of the data, breaking this down by course level, discipline and cohort. At times, I'll move to participation in employment-related activities to highlight key data relating to that measure. And then next we'll explore the percentages of students who engaged in paid work during study, the perceived value that they felt WIL had for employability, and the influence of WIL on their employment outcomes. Finally, we'll cover the impact of WIL on full-time employment, perceived overqualification, and how prepared graduates feel for full-time work. And then we'll have time for questions and discussion. But before getting started, I would like to thank Professor Denise Jackson for her guidance this year as I learned how to coordinate, analyse and report on the GOS data we received from the Social Research Centre on behalf of WIL Australia's membership. And I'd also like to recognise the many years of exceptional work that she's contributed for WIL Australia. So thank you, Denise. Okay, so a bit of background information. Since 2020, WIL Australia, formerly ASIN, has worked with the Social Research Centre to include 5 custom items in the National Graduate Outcomes Survey. These items help us to track participation in different types of WIL and understand their impact on graduate outcomes. And the different types of WIL we look at is workplace-based WIL, non-workplace WIL and global WIL versus no WIL participation at all. And in 2024, 37 member institutions participated. That was an increase from 2024, from 2022 and 2023, where we had 34 institutions as member institutions who participated in the GOS survey. So 37 institutions involved in the data set for 2024. Across those institutions, nearly 80,000 valid responses were received from graduates, and that was also an increase. The survey captures 3 main types of WIL, as I said, workplace-based WIL, non-workplace and global. It also allows us to identify those who didn't engage in any WIL, which is important for understanding gaps and opportunities. This consistent data collection over 5 years gives us strong evidence base to inform WIL practice and policy. And a lot of the trends that we'll see today, they are continuation of what we already know, a lot of it for those who are very familiar with the data. But it's important to always just make sure that we are on track with these things for what we're trying to achieve with WIL Australia. So here's a snapshot of overall WIL participation in 2024. Workplace-based WIL remained the most common form, with just over 42% of graduates, including undergraduates and postgraduates, reporting this experience. Non-workplace WIL, like simulations or classroom-based projects, was reported by about 20%, and global WIL by just under 5%. Oh, you can't see the slides. Sorry. Why is the screen not? It must have popped off. Thank you for letting me know in the chat, people. Okay, so you should be able to see the slides now. Cool. Sorry about that. So non-workplace WIL, like simulation projects, reported about 20%. Workplace-based WIL reported 42.7%, and global WIL, almost 5% participated in global WIL. So nearly 44% of graduates said they didn't participate in any WIL at all, and that's a good reminder that access and integration of WIL still might vary widely. Participation was strongest among undergraduates, with nearly 2/3 engaging in some form of WIL. Postgraduate coursework was slightly lower at 54%, and research postgraduates were the least likely to have participated, only about 1 in 5. So if we look at undergraduate participation in 2020-2024, undergraduates continue to lead in WIL participation, especially in workplace-based experiences. And in general, there was a slight increase in WIL participation for undergraduates across all the WIL types, as you can see by looking across the years, except in global WIL, that's sort of gone fluctuating a bit. But overall, in general, participation has increased across the WIL types in 2024 compared to 2023, and from previous years as well. If we look at postgraduate coursework students, they're participating in WIL at lower rates than undergraduates, especially in workplace-based WIL. This kind of makes sense, though. You can imagine postgraduates are probably already the need for WIL is possibly not needed as much. And they're also possibly engaged in paid work as they're studying at postgraduate level. So, but we have seen increases between the 2 years, 2024 to 2023, and it's steady across all the WIL types in that sense. Despite increasing emphasis on employability development, particularly through industry partnerships during research training as part of the MPILF scheme, the National Priorities and Industry Linking Fund that the government that we had as universities for the last few years. Only 22% of research graduates reported any WIL experience, and that marks a decline from 2023. That did surprise me, given that MPILF was designed to there was the option to focus on that as part of a priority area for MPILF for universities. But it seems to have had little impact for this cohort of students at this point. Maybe things will change. This slide shows the proportion of undergraduates in disciplines where WIL is traditionally part of the curriculum who reported participating in workplace-based WIL in the 2024 survey. So just this recent survey year. There was high participation in the typical professions where practical experience is mandatory. So like nursing, medicine, pharmacy, rehabilitation, engineering, social work, those kinds of things. Lower participation areas highlight potential opportunities to expand WIL and improve employability. And grey bars show students not participating at all. So even in fields with strong WIL traditions, there are some that have had lower rates of participation than you would hope for in those kinds of disciplines. So like perhaps medicine, you would expect it to be higher. I would have thought, but I'm not in that discipline. Veterinary science is doing very well. So yeah, if you are teaching into any of these disciplines, have a look at the bar that applies for you. So now, and I think this thing is in the way for you all, and I'm really sorry about that. I'm not sure how to get rid of it. Oh, I can move it? No, I can't really. Oh, yes, I can. There we go. That's better. So this slide shows the proportion of undergraduates in disciplines where WIL is traditionally part of the curriculum who reported participating in non-workplace-based WIL in 2024. Participation is generally lower than workplace-based WIL, but still notable in some areas such as veterinary science, rehabilitation, dentistry and pharmacy, where simulated or project-based experiences complement clinical placements like that students can attend. Teacher education, psychology, social work and humanities, culture and social science has the lowest participation, suggesting limited use of non-workplace WIL in these fields. Grey bars, again, represent students not engaging in this type of WIL, highlighting potential to diversify WIL approaches. And I can see people answering questions in the chat. Thank you. Now this thing is in the way of my arrows. Okay. And now we're looking at the global participation, global WIL participation. It's, of course, lower across these disciplines where WIL is part of the curricula, as you would expect, because it's quite difficult to organise global WIL experiences. Most of them are under 10% participation. Veterinary science stands out at 13%, and you know that there is potential for growth in this area, but it's of course very difficult to resource and coordinate, and perhaps global WIL isn't considered as necessary in these specific disciplines. I'm not sure, but I don't imagine that. I'm surprised that veterinary science stands out so much for global WIL in a way, because when you imagine veterinary practice, you don't imagine the need to go overseas, or but I think it's interesting that stands out so much. If anybody is from that field in the group, maybe you have some thoughts about what's going on there. Significant international enrolment. That's interesting. So this slide and the next two slides compare undergraduate participation in any WIL from 2023 to 2024 in study areas where WIL is integral to the curriculum. Shifts in participation in your study area or discipline may reflect program adjustments or placement availability, or other initiatives that are going on in that discipline. The yellow bars indicate students not participating in any WIL, which shows that even in mandatory WIL fields, gaps do persist for some disciplines. And I'll just flick through the two next slides slow enough that people can digest what's shown and spot their discipline. So this one's got teacher education, veterinary science, nursing, health services and support, architecture and built environment, computing and information systems, and science and maths. Okay, so this chart compares undergraduate participation in any WIL from 2023 to 2024 in disciplines where WIL is an elective. So these are the different set of disciplines. In past GOS presentations, Denise has shown these as aggregated figures across the whole years that we've run the GOS. And in some cases, and she did that because the sample sizes for some cases was less than 1,000. Here I decided to show the two individual years because we're now at, the GOS has been running since 2020, and I thought that, and the patterns of the aggregate data and the patterns for these 2 years were kind of similar. So I thought that it was helpful to see just the 2 latest years of data, which possibly are of most interest to you anyway. So just be mindful that for some of the disciplines, there might be the number of responses might be about 1,000 or something. But that's still 1,000 responses. So it gives you a bit of an idea of how these disciplines are tracking. And overall, participation seems to be steady between the 2 years. For some disciplines, there is a bit of a difference. So for agriculture and environmental studies, participation in any WIL actually increased by 10% from 2023 to 2024, while for tourism, hospitality, personal services, sport and recreation, there was a decline by about the same amount. So it's not shown on this slide, but I did look into global WIL in these elective disciplines, and it had the strongest link to full-time employment, possibly due to confidence and adaptability for this type of WIL fosters. The patterns shown on this slide suggest strong student interest in WIL and opportunities to expand WIL offerings in these elective undergraduate subjects further. The next 3 slides will show WIL participation by citizenship across 3 cohorts. So on this slide, we've got undergraduates, then postgraduate coursework on the next slide, followed by postgraduate research. And we're comparing 2023 and 2024 data. So among undergraduates, international graduates actually reported slightly higher participation in any WIL than domestic graduates, and comparing the WIL types, domestic graduates participated more in workplace-based WIL, while undergraduates reported participating more in the non-workplace-based WIL and global WIL. For postgraduate coursework, international graduates reported higher participation in any WIL than domestic graduates, and higher participation in any WIL type across both the years. And for postgraduate research participation by citizenship, WIL participation remains low overall, in line with what I've sort of been saying about the postgraduate research participation rates. International graduates reported slightly higher participation than domestic graduates across most of the WIL types, including the global WIL. Briefly, this slide generally shows that female undergraduates have reported slightly higher engagement in WIL than their male counterparts. The data for WIL participation in postgraduate coursework is a little different, with females participating more than males in workplace-based WIL, but ever so slightly less than males in non-workplace-based WIL, and less than males in global WIL. Regarding undergraduate participation by age, comparing people aged 24 years and under and with those who are 25 years and above, graduates who were 25 years and under engaged more in any WIL, as we would expect, but this was due to participation differences in non-workplace-based WIL and global WIL, not workplace-based WIL. The data for WIL participation in postgraduate coursework is different to this. So students aged 24 years and under participated about 15% more in any WIL in 2023 and in 2024 than those aged 25 years and above. And this was due to higher participation across all the WIL types for this younger group. This trend makes sense to me, as those over 25 are more likely to need to be employed to survive than those who are younger, and subsequently, unless it's mandated, to participate in WIL would probably time manage their learning and paid work accordingly. Now we'll look at the equity groups. So Indigenous undergraduates still report lower participation in any WIL compared to non-Indigenous undergraduates. However, in 2024, Indigenous participation in workplace-based WIL was actually higher than for non-Indigenous graduates, and possibly this was influenced by the National Priorities and Industry Linkage Fund, which aimed to target equity groups with one of the priority areas. And it's an encouraging result for this cohort and the higher education sector, so we can celebrate that small but nice little step in the right direction. Here, undergraduates from low and medium socioeconomic status postcodes reported slightly higher engagement in workplace-based WIL than those from high SES postcodes, although with little gain in 2024 compared to 2023. Undergraduates with a disclosed disability still report lower participation in any WIL compared to those without disability. However, in 2024, the gap narrowed slightly for workplace-based WIL, possibly influenced by the National Priorities and Industry Linkage Fund. While this improvement is small, it's a positive direction that we hope continues. Survey respondents were also asked if they had undertaken any not for academic credit employability related activities while they were studying. The options they could select in the survey included volunteering, position of responsibility in a club or society, mentee in an industry-based arrangement, co-curricular leadership or award program, micro-credentialing or digital badge program, enterprise incubator or startup activity, other or none of these. So looking at undergraduate participation in any and each of these employability related activities in 2024 alone, graduates with a disclosed disability reported higher overall participation than those without disability. They were particularly more likely to volunteer and hold a position of responsibility in a club or society. And I think this is great to see, as these activities tend to positively influence employability development and in turn, hopefully, their employment outcomes. And it's also it's encouraging that they are interested to participate in those kinds of opportunities as well that we are offering students at universities. So if we go back again to participation in WIL, this slide shows that undergraduates from a non-English speaking background continue to report slightly higher participation in any WIL than their English speaking counterparts in 2024, with only a small increase for English speaking students since 2023. Participation in workplace-based WIL is similar across both groups, but non-English speaking background students reported more engagement in workplace-based WIL and global WIL. Does someone have a question? Sorry. No. So there is a significant, a big gap in WIL participation between first in family undergraduates and those who are not. While progress has been made in 2024 compared to 2023, possibly supported by the MPILF initiatives, the gap remains most pronounced for workplace-based WIL still, as you can see here. And it hasn't really, it's shifted a little bit in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to do in that sense. And these students would really benefit from WIL experiences, especially if their family are not involved, have not ever been to university and have that kind of industry experience to share. For participation in employability related Activities. Volunteering is the most common activity overall, with about 35% of undergraduates and postgraduate research students as well participating in employability-related activities. Positions of responsibility in clubs or societies are also notable, especially for research students at 23%, and undergraduates at about 19%. However, more than half of all students, 56% overall and 63% of coursework postgraduates report none of these activities at all, and that's at the bottom row in this table, which suggests a real opportunity for us to encourage engagement in these types of activities. The strong participation in volunteering and leadership roles is very encouraging, as we know these activities are known to build transferable skills and positively influence employability and employment outcomes. So here are some of the key takeaways from the participation data. We're seeing steady growth in WIL participation overall since 2020, particularly among undergraduates. Postgraduate coursework students are also engaging more, but HDR students remain underrepresented. So this is a space where we could still explore more creative or flexible WIL models. Equity gaps persist. Indigenous, low SES and students with disability are still less likely to participate in work-based WIL. Non-workplace WIL is on the rise in general. This could be a key lever for expanding access, especially for students who face challenges with traditional placements, like mature age students. This slide shows patterns of paid work during study in 2024. Part-time work, not related to the intended career, was common overall, especially among undergraduates at almost 45%. Part-time work relevant to the intended career was also high, particularly for postgraduate research students at almost 51%. Full-time work relevant to the intended career was more common for postgraduate coursework students, almost 1/3 of students, than undergraduates at only 14%. Only 17% of students who reported no paid work during study. This slide highlights the value of WIL for employability in 2024. Graduates reported that WIL strengthened their professional capabilities, increased awareness of potential employers, and improved their appeal in the labour market. It also helped them build valuable networks for job prospects. The impact was particularly strong for postgraduate graduates who reported greater benefits across all areas. And it's notable that postgraduate research graduates reported the highest perceived value of WIL, despite having the lowest participation rates reported in this data. So this suggests a strong case for creating more WIL opportunities for postgraduate research students. This shows the perceived influence of WIL on employment outcomes as reported by graduates in 2024, comparing across the course levels. So graduates most often attributed employment to experience gained during WIL, followed by roles with WIL partners and networking opportunities. While the WIL was influential for many, a large proportion reported no direct impact, indicating that there is scope to strengthen connections between WIL and employment outcomes across all levels of study through perhaps university industry engagement. For this slide, this one is about full-time employment outcomes. So WIL continues to show a strong positive relationship with future employment outcomes. Graduates who participated in any form of WIL were more likely to be employed full-time than those who didn't. Workplace-based WIL had the most consistent and highest impact, followed by global WIL. Non-workplace WIL had a smaller effect, but it's still better than no WIL at all. And you can see, so this has got, of course, all the years of data, and we've increased since 2020 across all the WIL types, and it sort of fluctuates a bit across the years. There's a lot of external factors that go into this data. Graduates with disability perceived a positive effect on full-time employment from WIL across all types. And this data further reinforces what we've been saying about the value of the work that we do as a sector to facilitate inclusive, supported WIL experiences for all students. For Indigenous graduates, workplace-based and global WIL had the greatest perceived impact on full-time employment. Perceived overqualification is a useful proxy for whether graduates feel their job matches their skills and education. Graduates who participated in WIL, especially workplace-based, were less likely to feel overqualified in employment, and that suggests that WIL helps students find more meaningful, engaged employment, which we kind of already knew, but it's nice to get that. It's nice to get that feedback from graduates themselves. So preparedness for full-time work is one of the most important outcomes that we track, and the data continues to show that WIL makes a difference. Graduates who participated in WIL, especially workplace-based or global experiences, were more likely to stay in their qualification because it helped to prepare them for full-time work. WIL is an important differentiator for graduates because it helps build confidence when entering the workforce from university. And we need to make sure that we are providing high quality, safe and supportive WIL experiences in any type of WIL. In doing that, we will be giving students the best chance of success because we know that any type of WIL is better than none. So I've just gone through the slides at a very rapid pace because I really wanted to give plenty of time for discussion, and I've seen a lot of people posing questions in the chat, and I'd like to involve us all in conversation. So thank you for your attention and engagement in the chat. Let's have a bit of time now to discuss what you want to. So I'll go to this last slide before I turn off my slide share, just to remind people that we've got the conference coming up, and to thank you for watching the presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen now so I can see you all. Okay, so there's been questions, and please, can people feel free to turn their mic off, and I will answer questions and we can have a discussion on the data. I also could get the Tableau up to look at data if we want to look at something specific. It's really difficult to work out what to show in this presentation because I get a Tableau thing and there's just a lot of data, and I wanted to make it a bit different from the report. The report is in the chat. I think someone shared it. If it's not there, could someone please let me know? So we've got plenty of time to have a proper discussion if you wish. Leonie, hey.
Hi everyone. I'm sorry, I've joined in late. Thank you. Thanks, Liz, for a great presentation, and I think it's really valuable for all of us in our own universities, as I've done, to look at your own university's data versus the national data, and then unpack that to say, well, what does this mean? And I've been doing that at my university, going, oh, well, we're really on par with lots of things nationally, but we're really low on this and this. And so what does that mean? So when you look at the data, it informs your professional development capability for staff. What do we need to give to students? So it's really a worthwhile exercise at your own universities to get your data and analytics team. They've got the data because it's been given to them to compare your own university's data about WIL versus national and what does it mean to you and what do you need to do. So, I mean, every year these presentations are very valuable to get the bigger picture, and then we all drill down to what does it mean for us. So, thank you, Elizabeth. Always.
No worries at all. And that's
Yeah.
what I wanted this presentation to be, just that initial, like, this is where we're at as a sector, as a member universities, the ones that presented. And then really it is up to everybody to get their institutional report, access to it. If you don't have access, find out who you can get that from. Look at it in compared to the report that we've got on the WIL Australia website for 2024. Have a look at other data points that you have access to, like the quilt data that is collected. There's the GOS National Survey data that's different from this, the GOS ASIN, the GOS WIL Australia survey questions, and then the students' experience survey and the graduate outcome survey. All these data points are really important to look at, and then have a look at your disciplines in specifically, and think about. I saw some questions in the chat about, like, why is psychology like this, or why is vet science up like that, and start to understand why those trends are happening, and perhaps if it's a low trend that you want to increase, get the right people together in the room to discuss, and also reach out to other people at universities in those disciplines to try and share the load on working out what the problem is as well.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree. It's always start. Here's the big picture. Now, what does this mean for us? So I always appreciate these webinars because they are a starting point for further investigation. So thank you.
Pleasure. Yeah, I'm glad that it was helpful in that way. Yeah,
Always.
it feels like
Thank you.
every year, like we're just saying the same thing. So I try to vary it up a bit, but it's I'm glad that it's helpful, and it does remind us that we're heading in the right direction. Does anybody have any questions or want to just discuss anything that was said in the chat? Feel free to raise your hand or just turn your mic off. Tom's comment, perhaps we'll just help students realise how little relevance their degree is. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that it is just that piece of paper and that proof that you can finish a 3-year degree or a 4-year degree, and you have learned certain skills that other people who haven't learned those skills may not have. And yeah, it's a good comment. Yeah.
I had some student complaining all they did was prepare PowerPoint slides when they were working at one of the large consulting companies. And I said, congratulations, you've hit the big time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, I taught a third year unit this year, and I was surprised to discover that a lot of the students in the unit had never used Excel. They had no idea about the basic functions of Excel, and I actually think that you should actually have Excel in your secondary education. So yeah, I think that at least you should be familiar with the entire Microsoft Office suite by the time you finish your degree, and if that's and I'm sure that employers expect that these days. I've never known anybody that I've worked with in the university sector that doesn't know how to use all those different suites and things and doesn't have that written on their resume. So sometimes it's also just the basic things that you realise that we aren't necessarily ticking off on in students' coursework as they're learning across the degree. But it's also about the whole education system in Australia. I know there's a lot to address in primary and secondary school, but it would sometimes help if students came ready for university when we got them. I'm just going to look at some of the questions students were asked about WIL. So the questions that students were asked about WIL, I did briefly go over it at the beginning of the presentation, but they are in the actual report. If somebody has shared them in the chat, if not, I will do that now. Please, if can anyone raise any questions if they have any? I can go into the actual data if you have a specific question you want answered.
I'll be a pest because I'm always a pest. And looking at this GOS data over years and years and years, and I think there needs to be some, I don't know, some longitudinal view of what's shifted over the years or not shifted. Because I look at a lot of the responses year after year and think, okay, we're all just hovering along at the same percentages. So it would be great at some point to get a longitudinal view, just of some of the high levels of how things have changed or not changed,
That's a
especially
great
when
suggestion.
every university has employability in their mission and strategic plan. Every university does. And every university, oh, WIL is really good, blah, blah, blah. And it's not resourced very well. But longitudinally, what has happened in this space, just a simple table. I'm not asking you, Elizabeth, to do anything, but just what has happened over the last 5 years in a lot of these spaces.
That's a good idea. I should have done that for this presentation. I should have, at the end, had just like a table with 2020 now, and what each measure, how it's tracked. I might produce that. How about I produce that and get it ready to share at either by the end of this year or the start of next year, put it on the web page and sent around in the newsletter and stuff. Just a really little infographic.
A table of longitudinal what's been going on, and then once it happens nationally, it's easy to ask your own data analytics team in your university to go, well, can you add our university's responses to that, our own longitudinal? Because I think we need a bigger picture on what we're doing.
I like that. Someone's just said on the chat, I didn't give the link to the actual report. I'm going to put that in now. Vanessa, can you please write me an email just to remind me to do that, so that I actually do that?
Remind you, it's okay.
Julia?
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. It's always pleasing to see how valuable work integrated learning is year on year. This is refreshing. Similar to what Leona was saying, I'd be interested in seeing the longitudinal data because the first in family data is still pretty alarming. Like we're seeing an increase in international students, which is great, but we're all doing a lot with CDL, like embedding CDL in our work integrated learning or in our curriculum, but we're not getting that uptake in first in family as much as we would hope. So seeing that longitudinal data would be really good. And to see what the barriers are is maybe another opportunity for WIL Australia to look at.
It's hard to show on a PowerPoint slide, with all the different things across and all the different things are up, to put all the different years and actually make it visible for everybody. So that's why I did a lot of the current stuff, and I didn't want to do the aggregate because then you can't see the shift over time. So I think that's what I'll do next is just the key measures, how we're tracking for all the different things, and perhaps that's something we need to consider in how we write our member report next year. Just change the way that we do that so that it's easy for people. And Janice has just shared the GOS report surveys data link. I put the 2024 report in the chat. Does anybody have any further questions? We've got 10 minutes left.
Just comment on, because Eric just dropped a comment in there. Eric's from RMIT Vietnam campus, and I know we've been doing a lot of conversations around the impact of labour market and labour market dashboards, and some of you may all be using Lightcast and looking at labour market dashboards, and that's another layer that sits around what's going on in the work integrated learning space. But of course, this data is all about what we get from students completing the GOS and these questions. But of course, we're all mindful of what else is going on. And I think that's probably not a question, but the struggle that we all have in universities and the endless amount of dashboards with all of this data. There's this data and there's labour market data and creative art, and we all struggle to try to put an employability narrative around what we're doing, looking at so many different data sources. And I know it's challenging for anyone, and I know it's not WIL Australia's job to solve everything at all, but because this is just one data set that we're all struggling to put in as a jigsaw piece into the broader employability narrative. So it's important, but yeah, it's hard to correlate with everything else that's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And even the data itself, just from this survey, there's so much you could look at. It's a little overwhelming because what we put in this report, even for members, it doesn't show everything that you could possibly show. Yeah, it's difficult, but I think it would be really helpful if I did develop a little one-page PDF that summarizes the key things, and also if people have further requests for different things, I'm always open to feedback, especially for what you want to hear in the presentation next year, and also how you want the report, what you want to hear in the report. I think you have access to the survey questions themselves. I'm pretty sure they are. The analysis is in the report. Maybe we need to also share the actual survey so that people understand what was asked as part of the report as an appendix. And oh no, there we are. We've got the WIL Australia questionnaire. It's in Appendix 1, the actual questions that were asked to students. So you've got those there. Maria.
Hello, thank you so very much. I'm new here. It's fascinating report and very interesting insights. The question I would love to ask, I'm very intrigued by participation in employability related activities. Any particular observations, insights, anything that surprised you at all about this, which is maybe not necessarily covered in the report?
Let me just look at that part in the report again. Participation in, trying to get it up, employability related activities. Denise, if you're here as well, if you have any thoughts, you're welcome to say as well. I do have the, which wasn't shared, in the report, it's got, hopefully you can see, big enough. It's got the employability related activity participation by Indigenous, disability, citizenship and non-English speaking backgrounds. And I think I did show this actually, I talked about it. So there's different ways you can look at this data from different when we looked at the course level, comparing across course levels, I thought it was interesting that, and I think it was in the presentation itself. I can't remember what I said. I'll get the presentation back up. Just for 2024. I thought it was interesting that postgrad researchers, students were participating a lot in volunteering. Although I guess I do a lot of volunteering, and maybe I just don't think it's volunteering. When I was doing my PhD, I thought of it as part of my PhD. But yeah, it's interesting that they categorised that as volunteering, and that it was that postgrad coursework students were engaging so much in volunteering, when I would have thought that they often are involved a lot in work. They're already employed. Denise has sort of said this may be because of student commitments or because curriculum-based initiatives that we are all introducing, which is great and more equitable. Yeah. I think it does help when these employability-related activities are, these are the ones that are not embedded in the curriculum, Eric. But it's helpful to have things embedded in the curriculum, as we know, so that all students are involved. Yeah. And Denise is saying that participation in these activities is provided in the national reports that we release and can be compared over time by looking at the various years. That's correct. Yeah. So you can look at the different reports. They're on the website. You can get all the reports up and look at the different tables comparing across years. And they do have this kind of table in it.
Thank you. This is very helpful.
No worries. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It is just diving into what you're interested in with the data, and perhaps finding a colleague at your university that you can talk to about the data, because it's always helpful having someone to discuss what you're seeing with, as well, and maybe identify opportunities for ways that you can have positive impact. So I'll stop sharing my screen again. We're sort of towards the end. Has anybody got any more questions? I've kept it really short this time. I know that it's usually like right to the end and then we don't have very much time for discussion, but I did want to have time for discussion. I thought that was important. And if you do have further questions about any of the data, please do feel free to get in touch with me. With WIL Australia, my email is e.cook@ecu.edu.au. That's my Western Australia university that I am now casually employed with. So I usually, I'm very responsive still with that email, and you can contact me there. I'll put it in the chat if that helps. And you can always email WIL Australia as well directly. But yeah, I love the feedback that you've given today on and ideas on how to what you might want, because as you know, research and impact committee chair, I can facilitate those things, and if I only know what people want through you guys raising those things with me. So thank you for mentioning those ideas. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. I can give you 5 minutes back, which is amazing. And you can, if you've got a meeting next, you can go and have a loo break and get a drink. So thank you for coming, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you next year at the webinar. And thank you to Denise as well for her help with training me. So have a great end of year, everybody. And thanks for all the work that you've been doing that has made this data show in such a positive way.